me know when you can see me. Hey there everybody, Tom here. It's time for our weekly Bible study. A couple minutes late again. I took a little while figuring out where we were at. I couldn't figure it out. Looks like people are... Oh, there you are. Looks like it's finally going live. Hey everybody, Tom here. It's time for another weekly Bible study. Sorry I'm getting late. Started a little bit late again. It took me a little while to figure out where we were at. Waited just a minute or two for other people to see that we're live so they can join up and follow along with us. I haven't lost anybody. You never know, talking about end time stuff. Some people get upset about that kind of thing. It's kind of what we did last week. It kind of turned into that. I'm not sure why it turned into that, didn't it? Or no, that was 2 weeks ago. We didn't do it last week for some reason, right? Now I'm confused. Hey there, Chris. Yeah, it was a good day. It was a good day. Got my jobs done, and we just played a game with the family. Played some Pictionary, which Asher won. And it's been a nice day. We've been enjoying getting work in the garden done. Stuff is starting to come up, which is exciting. I ate a strawberry out of the garden today. The boys brought me one of the first strawberries. I had them go out, and we've been all taking turns weeding 1 square foot of the strawberry bed, which is overrun with grass, but it's getting there. All right, well, we can go ahead and continue along and reading it, and then people can join up while we're doing it. And we're going to be reading from the 1984 edition of the New International Version, NIV. I do not recommend the newest NIV, the version that exists currently. It's changed way too much. But the 1984 edition I like a lot, and that's what our audio Bible is that we're going to be following along in. So, you guys ready? Here we go.
John 8. But Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. At dawn he appeared again in the temple courts, where all the people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus,
"Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now, what do you say?"
They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. But Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them,
"If any one of you is without sin, let him be the first to throw a stone at her."
Again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older ones first, until only Jesus was left, with the woman still standing there. Jesus straightened up and asked her,
"Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?"
"No one, sir,"
she said.
"Then neither do I condemn you.
Jesus declared.
Go now and leave your life of sin."
When Jesus spoke again to the people, he said,
"I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life."
The Pharisees challenged him.
"Here you are, appearing as your own witness. Your testimony is not valid."
Jesus answered,
"Even if I testify on my own behalf, my testimony is valid, for I know where I came from and where I am going. But you have no idea where I come from or where I am going. You judge by human standards. I pass judgment on no one. But if I do judge, my decisions are right, because I am not alone. I stand with the Father who sent me. In your own law it is written that the testimony of 2 men is valid. I am one who testifies for myself. My other witness is the Father who sent me.
Then they asked him,
Where is your Father?
You do not know me or my Father.
Jesus replied.
If you knew me, you would know my Father also.
He spoke these words while teaching in the temple area near the place where the offerings were put, yet no one seized him because his time had not yet come. Once more Jesus said to them,
I am going away, and you will look for me, and you will die in your sin. Where I go, you cannot come.
This made the Jews ask,
Will he kill himself? Is that why he says, Where I go, you cannot come?
but he continued,
You are from below, I am from above. You are of this world. I am not of this world. I told you that you would die in your sins. If you do not believe that I am the one I claim to be, you will indeed die in your sins.
Who are you?
they asked.
Just what I have been claiming all along.
Jesus replied,
I have much to say in judgment of you, but he who sent me is reliable, and what I have heard from him I tell the world.
They did not understand that he was telling them about his Father. So Jesus said,
When you have lifted up the Son of Man, then you will know that I am the one I claim to be, and that I do nothing on my own, but speak just what the Father has taught me. The one who sent me is with me. He has not left me alone, for I always do what pleases him.
even as he spoke, many put their faith in him.
I'll go ahead and stop it there, because we're not going to get that far anyway, so don't need to keep playing the whole chapter. So, continuing in John chapter 8, we'll go back to the beginning here of the story of the woman caught in the act of adultery. It should be noted that in many of your Bibles you may see a little star there or a little note down at the bottom. Most manuscripts don't have this story, and some Bible versions don't include it at all because of that. So it is in one version, and so it's become such a story that people love so much, it kind of survives the test of time. I'm not saying it didn't happen, but it needs to be noted that the oldest manuscripts don't have this story. And so many think that it was added in there later, and possibly it was. But there's not a lot in there there's nothing out of character necessarily for Jesus here. So there's no, we can still talk about it, and I think that it probably happened. So as to the reason why it wasn't included or was only written in later, I'm not sure what was happening there. So again, Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. You hear that a lot. Jesus, in Luke it said that Jesus spent every night on the Mount of Olives. And you know, the big apocalyptic end times chapter, Matthew 24, Luke 21, and Mark 13, all take place on the Mount of Olives also. What about the man who was part of it? This whole story from like the first, I think it's 17 verses, if I recall. Anyways, the whole story about the woman caught in the act of adultery, that whole story wasn't there in most of the old manuscripts. So yeah, this entire section doesn't exist in a lot of the oldest versions. That's what I meant. So at dawn, he appeared again in the temple courts, where all the people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. So this shows that he was at the temple courts more than once, as likely he was. But in a lot of the other Gospels, we don't have a lot of times, again, where Jesus goes to Jerusalem or is at the temple area. In fact, it seems to indicate in the other Gospels that the first time he went to the temple in Jesus' day, when he was older and his ministry had started, is when they crucify him, when he's there. So, but the teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group. So this is very possible. I mean, sounds exactly like the kind of thing that they would do to try to trap Jesus. So this says she was caught in adultery. That kind of implies she was caught in the act, like she was red-handed or, naked-bodied, so to speak. And it said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now what do you say? And so this is an interesting conundrum they would put Jesus in, because the law does say that. In fact, that's what people say today. If you talk to any atheists or people who are detractors of the Bible, that one of the first things they're going to do is go back to the Old Testament and talk about stoning people for gathering sticks, stoning people for this, stoning people for that. Yes, put those cats outside. The cats keep breaking in. Those neighbors' cats keep somehow finding their way in here through open windows and such. Sorry. So yeah, they were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. So, and again, it does say that in the Old Testament. The Old Testament, it does say to stone women caught in the act of adultery. And so sitting here to ask Jesus kind of puts them in a quandary, because this kind of stuff was happening all the time in their day, and they weren't stoning anybody. So putting Jesus against the law, so to speak, really in a time when no people did that anyways. Generally, some people did get stoned, and I can't say it never happened, obviously. I'm gonna sneeze. Whew, excuse me. Aren't you glad we can sneeze freely without having to say we have COVID? You don't have COVID anymore? Oh, okay. So Jesus started to bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. That's always been curious. That's the kind of thing that if this was a fake story, why on earth would that be in there? You know what I mean? So that's a curious thing. I wonder what he was writing or what he was doing. When they had kept questioning him, he straightened up and said, "If any one of you is without sin, let him be the first to throw a stone at her." I always think this is funny, because this wouldn't work among Christian circles today, because we've all been programmed that everybody sins. But here it says, again he stooped and wrote on the ground. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older ones first. So I find that just really interesting. They didn't just all go, "Oh, we've all sinned, we're all sinners, everybody sins." No, these people basically claim to be without sin. And if you did sin, you certainly didn't talk about it. And the Pharisees would say that they were without sin. In fact, Paul is said in the New Testament, as far as the law was concerned, he was faultless. And so, I mean, I use that to kind of show that even among Paul, I mean, he was saying that after Jesus, that he didn't break the law at all. And so, but still, they'll go away the older ones first, one at a time. They didn't all just leave. Today we'd be like, "Oh, come on, Jesus, everybody sins." So it wasn't quite as clear, and of course we didn't have Jesus' teachings then either. So until only Jesus was left with the woman standing there. Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir." "Then neither do I condemn you. Go and leave your life of sin." Or "Go and sin no more," as some of the other versions say. I always like that sentence there. I think about it a lot, because he wasn't saying what she did was not sin. He wasn't saying what she did was not worthy of being stoned according to the law. He just said, "Go and sin no more. Go and leave your life of sin." That didn't mean to go back to the guy that she just was caught with, right? Go and stop doing that. So that's one of the other things. How can you be forgiven for a sin that you don't stop doing? He's calling her to leave her life of sin. Don't go back to that guy. Tell people that is always acting like a Pharisee. Yeah, it's a sentence, unfortunately, fortunately and unfortunately, that has run rampant. You know, that he that was without sin cast the first stone. We are so programmed with this story, it almost has lost all of its meaning, and that makes it sad. So it's so cliche that we almost don't even think about it. And we all have broken the law. We've all sinned. And so that's the manner in which he's saying these things. Follow Jesus said, "Love one another." Definitely love. Love doesn't say, that necessarily that you can't ever take a stand against sin. I think there's more of an attitude these days that I'm not saying that you're saying this, Susie, but some people who are in quite an obstinate state of sin and say, you got to love me, you got to love me. And you can, it's been said, hate the sin, love the sinner. I think that's a good attitude. That's not in the Bible, by the way. But it is something, kind of a good idea to be. You don't have to take a stand and let people sin. Jesus didn't here. Go and leave your life a sin. He didn't just let her be. He didn't say, well, whatever, that's not what I think. If I was there, I wouldn't do that. But, you do you. That's not what Jesus says here. She deserved to be stoned. And he gave her mercy and said, go leave your life of sin. He still encouraged her to stop sinning, just to give her mercy on the punishment. Yep, for sure, Debbie. When Jesus spoke again to the people, he said, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. And so I love that verse, and it's funny again because what would they have thought? I mean, saying, I am the light of the world. That's a really bold thing to say, which is probably why the Pharisees challenged him after. Here you are, appearing as your own witness, your testimony is not valid. And what he means by that is that the Bible in the Old Testament, it said that you were not to believe anybody if they had any kind of an accusation or a teacher or anything, unless he was corroborated by 2 or 3 witnesses. So you had to have more people on your side than just yourself. And you see kind of a theme in this chapter, and I've kind of mentioned it before, that Jesus, in a lot of ways, opposes the law. He pushes back against it at the very least. He says things like, you've heard it said, don't commit adultery, but I tell you, if you lust in your heart, you've already committed adultery. Don't be a murderer, but if you hate your brother, you're already a murderer. You said you've heard it said eye for eye and tooth for tooth, but I tell you, turn the other cheek. And even here, this woman's caught in the act of adultery. The law says to stone her, but Jesus says, I'm not gonna. And here he says some of the same things. He's testifying as to himself. Of course he can. He's the Son of God. Of course he knows that, and they are trying to figure that out. A lot of people already did believe in him, but the Pharisees didn't necessarily believe. But they're just trying to get him on a technicality here. Your testimony is not valid. That's not what the law says. Got to have 2 witnesses. And over and over here, again, it seems like Jesus is opposed to the law. When they, remember the Pharisees asked him, Sadducees asked him about the woman who was married, 7 times, whose wife will she be after, in the next life? And Jesus is going on to say, oh, no, that's actually not, I'm getting 2 things confused. Where they say, is it right to divorce your wife for any reason? And Jesus said, your hearts were hard. That's why Moses wrote you this law. But it is not that way from the beginning. What God has joined together, let man not separate. So he basically says that law is dumb. That law is stupid, and that's not what God wants. You shouldn't obey that law. And so it's kind of, you see that over and over again. And here in a second here, we're going to say some of the same things. Here in verse 17 it says, in your own law it is written that the testimony of 2 men is valid. And it's interesting, he doesn't say in the law. He says in your own law. Not my law, not the law, your law. And he uses that thing, your law. He says that a few times. He says, is it not written in your law that we are gods, that you are gods? And if the law is so important and it can't be broken, then why are you mad at me for saying I'm the Son of God? And he's almost mocking it. If your law is so perfect, then you shouldn't be mad at me because the law says you're gods. And in a lot of ways, Jesus is pushing against the law. It doesn't mean the Old Testament's bad by any stretch of the imagination. But in a lot of ways, they didn't have the fullness of the understanding of the purpose of it. And again, some of those laws, were written by Moses, and some of them were written by God, right? God wrote the 10 Commandments with his finger on the stone tablets. Moses wrote the rest of the law, the ceremonial law, some people call it, and it was kept in a pouch next to the ark. It wasn't actually kept in the ark. The only thing in the ark of the covenant, God's covenant, was the 10 Commandments. And even that they got wrong. Jesus answered, "Even if I testify on my own behalf, my testimony is valid, for I know where I come from and where I am going. But you have no idea where I come from, where I am going." He said, even though the law says you got to have two, whatever I say is valid because I created everything. I'm God, basically. I know where I came from. I came from heaven. I know where I'm going. I'm going back to heaven where I live. So it is valid because he's the creator. Of course, they don't, to their credit, they don't necessarily know that. Jesus knows that. He says, you're judging by human standards. I pass judgment on no one. He could have passed judgment. But if I do judge, my decisions are right because I am not alone. I stand with the Father who sent me. In your own law, it is written that the testimony of two men is valid. I am one who testifies for myself. My other witness is the Father who sent me. So he says, I do have two witnesses, the Father and me. And of course, by Father, he's talking about God. But on more than one occasion, Jesus mentions God is his Father. And in one place, they want to stone him because they weren't saying it like we're all sons of God. He's saying like God's my daddy. He gave birth to me, and he didn't give birth to me. He's my real, actual, biological father, so to speak. And that is why they want to stone him. And in this regard, I think he's saying it in kind of the same way. That's why they ask him, where is your father? So your father's on your side? Where is he? And he says, you do not know me or my Father. If you knew me, you would know my Father also. He spoke these words while teaching in the temple area near the place where the offerings were put. Yet no one seized him because his time had not yet come. This is valid. This is important because later on here they're going to take Jesus and arrest him. And Jesus is going to say, you're acting like I'm doing some conspiracy here. I was teaching in the synagogues and in public all the time. You never arrested me then. So I was saying something so bad. Why didn't you arrest me? And that's the point of them saying here. No one seized him because his time had not yet come. You guys all still here and breathing? What would you have done if Jesus caught you, and when someone caught you in the middle of a sin and brought you out? Wouldn't that be so embarrassing? Once more Jesus said to them, I am going away, and you will look for me, and you will die in your sin. Where I go, you cannot come. I love that verse too. I'm going away and you're going to look for me and you will die in your sin. Why do you suppose they're going to die in their sin? I think the only reason can be because they don't recognize him as Jesus, the God's Son that died for our sins. He doesn't say everybody's going to die for their sin. Just you guys, because they don't believe. Jesus died for the sins of the whole world, but you have to want the forgiveness. You have to believe that he did that. You can't just have it by osmosis because he did it. It's a gift. It's a free gift that you have to take. I always find it confusing that a man was allowed to make laws that Jesus later changed and said were not good. It is confusing. It is confusing. And some people would say, no, he didn't say they're not good. He was just really clarifying that it's actually bigger than that. No, he really does. And
this is a reminder.
In Hebrews is my favorite New Testament book. And in one place it says, well, better fit me. Well, let me read it. It sounds like a good rabbit trail to be on it for a minute here. So again, you know what Old Covenant means? There's Old Testament. It means covenant, Old Covenant, and New Testament, New Covenant. That's why they're divided. It's not Jesus and then all the other stuff. It's the Old Covenant was based on the old law, the old deal, the 10 Commandments. They lived their life by the laws that were written in the Old Testament, the Old Covenant. And when Jesus came, he made a new covenant. And he got rid of the old one. A lot of people find that really hard to swallow. because the Ten Commandments, you're saying the Ten Commandments are gotten away with? Yeah, they're gone. That doesn't mean it's okay to kill and murder and all those types of things. Let me put it to you this way. Before Moses gave them the Ten Commandments, did they all think, oh, it's fine to kill people? God's cool with us killing people. Adultery? Yeah, no problem. That's fine. You think that they didn't know that those things were bad long before Moses wrote them down and put them they got them on the stone tablets and put them in the ark? They already knew that. And Paul actually says, to be sure, sin was in the world before the law was given, but sin is not charged to your account where there is no law. That is, sin has always been around. The Ten Commandments don't define what sin is. And just because they're gone doesn't mean now we can go back to sinning and doing whatever we want. That's why it was called the Ark of the Covenant, right? The Ark of the Covenant contained the stone tablets of the covenant, and they were inside. It says here, for if there had been nothing wrong with that first covenant, no place would have been sought for another. But God found fault with the people and said, the days are coming, declared the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the people of Israel and the people of Judah. It will not be like the covenant I made with their ancestors when I took them by the hand to lead them out of Egypt, because they did not remain faithful to my covenant, and I turned away from them. So, and this is the covenant I'm going to make. I'm going to put my laws in their minds and write them in their hearts. That is, you're going to know what you should do, and you're going to obey what's in your heart, and you're going to honor God, not because it's written down on some stone tablet somewhere. Does that make sense? In fact, there's an Old Testament passage that a lot of people think is about the dead coming back to life, where it says there's dry bones, and there's going to be flesh on the bones, and to put a heart in them. And it says, I will remove your heart of stone and replace it with a heart of flesh. And that doesn't mean they literally had a heart of stone. The reference there is to the heart of stone as in the stone tablets. And they're going to replace it with a heart of flesh. That is, God's going to be written on their laws will be written on their hearts. And even Paul at one point says, written not on tablets on stone, but on tablets of human hearts. So that's where God's laws are. They're not in the Ten Commandments. That doesn't mean, again, it's fine to break them. But you can't go back to them and start, resurrecting those things that Jesus died to get rid of. Here at the end it says, by calling this covenant new, he has made the first one obsolete. And what is obsolete and outdated will soon disappear. And of course, this was written before Jerusalem was destroyed, before the temple was destroyed and the priesthood was removed and the Ark of the Covenant was destroyed, all those things. And of course, by the time this was written, very soon after that, it was destroyed. And so, but imagine that. The Old Covenant, what is the Old Covenant? That's the Ten Commandments. Some people get really upset if you tell them that the Ten Commandments are obsolete and outdated. That did lead some people, there's talk about the Nicolaitans in Revelation, and the rumor is that they took this to the extreme and went on to just be sinners all over the place, even swapping their wives with each other because there's no sin anymore, it's all gone. And that's not the way to act either. But at the same time, you can see how you can fall in one ditch or the other. You can be a Pharisee and go letter by letter of the law, and Jesus says you're going to die in your sin. Or you can be on the other side, so full of grace that you think it's not even possible to sin anymore, and you can just do whatever you want. So then should we study the Old Testament covenant as history, but not meant for our generation to follow those laws and rules? So that's an interesting topic there, Debbie. A lot of time it says, what's the saying? I'm going to do it wrong. There's a really cool little rhyme. The Old Testament is the new concealed, but the New Testament is the old revealed. I think it's something like that. And so the Old Testament is the key to why Jesus came and did what he did. Jesus kept the old covenant. That's why he had the authority to make a new one. So he was able to, and again, not that it's necessarily, where did my thing go? Still there? My thing disappeared. I don't know, the internet goes out when that. Oh, no, you're back. So anyways, the old covenant is historic, and it's not even necessarily bad. There's a lot of good things in it. But it has to be noted that the Bible is a very interesting book. We have no other book like it, where the earliest accounts span stuff that happened, estimated like 7,000 years ago. And then we have stuff written that's only 2,000 years ago. And so it's a very interesting world, and especially when you consider things like the cultural way of the world, like in those Old Testament days when everybody was sacrificing to different gods. Who do you sacrifice to? Who do you sacrifice to? And so then they sacrifice only to the Lord, and that's when God started making himself known among the people of Israel. And so they decided to sacrifice. He's better than all those other gods. You have to sacrifice your firstborn male, best of your flock lamb, not your rejects like all the other gods got. And so that's the definition of holy. Holy means to be separate. It's to be apart from the rest of the way the world does things. The law is given to us to show us that we're sinners in the New Testament, and about Jesus being the only way. I think that's absolutely true. I mean, Paul actually says that exact thing. He says, I would not even know what coveting was if the law had not said, do not covet. And I got people that take that literally. I think Paul knew what coveting already was. I mean, we already know, right? Because Adam ate of the tree of what? The tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So without any laws necessary, we all already know the difference between good and evil. We don't need the law for that. And it's actually, the reasonings for the law are still something I'm working on myself. But near as I can figure, Paul says at one point, when the law came, sin sprang to life, and I died. That's where he says, the sting of death is sin, and the power of sin is the law. That is the strength of sin. That you ever heard of, man, why does it keep going out? Of Satan being called the accuser of the brethren? There's several places where Satan's called the accuser. And it says in Revelation that he stands before our God day and night accusing the saints. Isn't that what happened in Job's day? He was trying to accuse him of sin even then. But what does he accuse them by? He says, oh, you said don't murder. Look, they're murdering. Oh, he says don't covet what your neighbor has. Oh, they're doing that too, God. What are these people of yours? They're breaking all your laws. And so that's why he gets rid of them. He has no longer any strength and any power to accuse them. There's no more strength of sin because the law has been removed. Paul calls it the barrier. For he himself is our peace, who has made the two groups, it's talking about Jews and Gentiles. He's made the two groups one and has destroyed the barrier, the dividing wall of hostility, by setting aside in his flesh the law with its commandments and regulations. His purpose was to create in himself one new man out of the two, thus making peace. So that barrier, that dividing wall of hostility, was the law with its commandments and regulations, even though there's nothing wrong with those. So every time Paul says this, he almost always saying, does that mean the law is sin? God forbid. It's not sin. That doesn't mean that it's okay to sin. It still shows us a picture of what we should be. But in reality, we all knew the difference between right and wrong way before Moses came along. Religion has failed us. Yeah, I mean, what is religion anyways? It's just rules taught by men. James says, religion that pleases the Father is to look after orphans and widows in their distress and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. That's what religion that pleases God is. It's not going to church and wearing nice clothes, and not that those things are bad, they're not. But I think a lot of times as humans, we like to follow rules. We like to check boxes. We like to say, yep, don't commit adultery, did it. Love your neighbor, I did that this morning. Because we want to decide that we are good, that we're righteous on our own. We're going to go to heaven because I do this. But we should know that we can't keep the law. That's what he says. He says if there was nothing wrong with that law, no place would have been sought for a new one. But God found fault with the people. They couldn't keep the law. Nobody can keep the law. So if it's a matter of keeping a bunch of rules so we can live, we're all doomed. But Jesus did keep the laws, and he died on our behalf as that perfect lamb that was unblemished so that we don't have to. That doesn't mean we can sin. We should stay away from sin. But we do have forgiveness in the event that we do. Alrighty, I think we're going to probably stop right there, and I know I'll come back to this place. So I should probably leave this on the screen so when I'm looking at it next week I'll know where I made it to. Does anybody have any questions or anything? Well, I feel some of the Ten Commandments that Moses stated on a stone tablet are part of the laws that our governments here in the USA, they all have. That's a good question, Brittany. That's a topic called theonomy, the idea that we should base our laws based on what the Bible's laws are. And I think that's a fine way to keep the law. Because again, our world is over people that don't even believe in God. So you have to have rules and regulations. And obviously murdering and stealing and adultery, all these things are wrong. And as far as how to run a country, I think the Ten Commandments are great for that. But they're not going to get us into heaven. So when I say that they're gone, that doesn't mean that you can go around breaking whatever laws you want. That just means that God's not going to judge you by what those laws say because of what Jesus did for us. Does that make sense? That doesn't mean they're bad. I think they're great, and we should all strive to do those things, but not because they're written on some stone tablets. And there were cultural things there too, like the Sabbath stuff, which again, I struggled with the Sabbath stuff for a long time, and I do think we should keep it, but Hebrews, I think it's 3 and 4, talk about the point of the Sabbath was to point forward to our rest in heaven, which is what we are trying to get to. So, alrighty, well, I appreciate all of you guys. Oh, you missed it, Sally. Well, you can definitely watch the replay. Thank you guys so much for being here and supporting us and just talking. I enjoy this so much. It brings me peace and times when sometimes I don't have a lot of peace. So I thank you a lot. So, all right, well, I'll see you guys later. Thanks again. Don't forget to like the video.